Indiana's Ron Artest has been suspended for the remainder of the season. It was unanimous. 1-0.
I'm Jeremy Schaap in New York, where Sunday afternoon Commissioner David Stern meted out some of the stiffest suspensions in NBA history.
I'm Kelly Neal in Indianapolis, and I'll have the latest on the Pacers.
I'm George Smith in Auburn Hills, Michigan. The Pistons host their first game since Friday night's fight. We've got the reaction.
This is SportsCenter.
Pacers and Pistons get served. Ron Artest forced to sit for the season. What now for Indiana, Detroit, and the NBA? Peyton pads his historic touchdown run. Eli gets a real shot to win his first game. And Big Ben finally acts his age. Plus, talk about a fight. The chase for the Nextel Cup comes down to the final lap. Clearly, the NBA is not a democracy. Commissioner David Stern has spoken. Alongside Stuart Scott, I'm Steve Levy, welcoming you to SportsCenter. And Stuart, a new precedent has been set.
Absolutely, Steve. Shock, revulsion, and fear. 3 emotions David Stern admitted he felt watching Friday night's brawl in Detroit. And those 3 turned into a steely resolve. Stern's punishment severe. 9 players, a total of 143 games, including a 73-game suspension for Ron Artest. That is the rest of the season. It's also the longest suspension ever for a player for an on-court incident. Artest clearly the flashpoint for the start of the brawl. The commissioner said that he felt fear that a fan would be injured, possibly permanently, hence the stiff punishment. Here it is right here. The 9 players, the suspension, 73 games for Artest. That's the rest of the season. Steven Jackson gets 30, Jermaine O'Neal 25, Anthony Johnson 5, Reggie Miller 1, Ben Wallace 6 games, Chauncey Billups 1, Eldon Campbell 1, and Derek Coleman 1 game. All suspensions without pay. Artest, Jackson, and O'Neal over a combined $10 million lost. Jeremy Schaap was there when David Stern handed out the punishment.
In his 20-plus years as commissioner of the NBA, David Stern has rarely, if ever, put on a sterner face. 48 hours after the melee in Detroit, he surfaced at Madison Square Garden to announce the suspensions and express his disgust.
We have to make the point that there are boundaries in our games, and that one of those boundaries, which has always been, but is hereby announced to be immutable, is the boundary that separates the fans from the court. And players cannot lose control and go into the stands.
Stern said that the decision to suspend Ron Artest for the rest of the season was based, at least in part, on his history of bad behavior. Billy Hunter, the head of the Players Union, said that that was unfair. He said he will appeal the suspensions of Artest, Steven Jackson, and Jermaine O'Neal.
I disagree with the length, specifically as it relates to Ron Artest. I don't think it warrants, when you look at the totality of the circumstances, just judging from this incident alone, I don't think it warrants his suspension for the entire season.
What would, in your mind, constitute a fair suspension of Ron Artest?
Well, what I was hoping was that the commissioner might impose, I think one could live with a 30-game suspension.
Stern, though, expressed confidence that the suspensions will not be shortened on appeal. He said safety is the key issue.
My first priority was the safety of the fans and the players, and all those who are on the bench and around the bench and in the building. I mean, we have a collective responsibility to have a civilized grouping in these arenas, and I think that's my responsibility.
Stern said he hasn't decided yet how NBA security might be changed as a result of what happened in Detroit. He and Hunter agree that the NBA's problems are societal.
Sports reflects society, and that we're a very good place to get a take on society. And society has become less civil. social norms really are, to some extent, breaking down across a broad array of places. What you say, what you do, how you act, it no longer matters based upon any old social conventions. And I think that in sports, we're beginning to see the same thing.
We live in a violent society. You know, last week you had a fight, pregame fight between Pittsburgh and Cleveland, right? You had a fight yesterday between Clemson, the kids of Clemson and South Carolina. You know, we're in a war, you know, and people are getting killed every day. And I think what happens is after a while we sort of develop an immunity, you know, to violence, et cetera, until something like this happens, and then all of a sudden it wakes us up and we say, wow, you know, let's get control of this thing.
At one point during his press conference, Stern mentioned the fact that basketball in its early days was played in a cage. Clearly, he's hoping that the stiffness of the suspensions he's meted out will prevent the game from returning to the cage. In New York, Jeremy Schaap, ESPN.
All right, Jeremy, our test suspension, as you know, is the longest in NBA history. To put it all in perspective of all sports, Pete Rose and Lenny Randle each received 30-day suspensions in the majors. That's the longest in baseball over the last 50 years. 2 NHL players have gotten 23-game suspensions, the longest in that league's history. Kelly Neal is in Indianapolis.
In a statement released by the Players Association, Pacers forward Ron Artest expressed remorse for his actions in Friday night's brawl, saying in part, quote, "I didn't mean for the situation to turn out like it did. I also regret and apologize to fans who were upset by what happened. I respect David Stern, but I don't think that he has been fair with me in this situation," end quote. As for the Pacers, league rules will allow them to sign players to fill the roster spots created by the suspensions of Artest, Jermaine O'Neal, and Steven Jackson. For the remainder of games, those players have been suspended. Anthony Johnson and Reggie Miller's suspensions will take place once they come off the injured list.
Kelly, more on the Indies side now. Pacers co-owner Herb Simon objected to the severity of the punishment in a statement released by the team on Sunday night. Quote, "While we do not condone some of the actions of the players involved, we do consider the action taken Sunday by the National Basketball Association to be unprecedented and inappropriate based on the circumstances." He went on to say, "We believe that there was a rush to judgment and not enough opportunity for all sides to be heard. And finally, we will vigorously support our players in any available appeal process in order to have these penalties reviewed and reduced. We owe that much to our players, our fans, and our community."
Nearly 10 years ago, February 1995, Vernon Maxwell was suspended for 10 games for going into the stands to hit a fan. That was an incident. This was a brawl, a riot. We bring in Stephen A. Smith and Greg Anthony now. Guys, you've heard the suspensions. Ron Artest, 73 games the rest of the season. Is that stiff a suspension appropriate? Stephen, we'll start with you.
Well, I definitely think it appears to be appropriate. I would have liked to have seen it just a tad bit less, simply because I think that Steven Jackson deserved the most severe penalty of all. I know there are some people that would say Ron Artest was the one that jumped into the stands and instigated the whole incident, and I can certainly understand that mode of thinking, Stu, but at the end of the day, he was provoked to some degree when the beer was tossed in his face. So you suspend him and you hand down a severe penalty, and I get that. But what about Steven Jackson? He jumped into the stands, started throwing haymakers, and there was no provocation aimed in his direction. Ron Artest was the one that had something thrown on him, and again, he deserved the suspension. But for Steven Jackson to receive a penalty that was clearly and significantly less than what Ron Artest received, I disagree with that.
Hey, Greg, play NBA Commissioner David Stern for me. If you got to suspend Artest and Jackson, what number of games do you give them?
You know, you knew it was going to be unprecedented in terms of the fine and the suspension, simply because the act was unprecedented. You know, at the end of the day, and I do think there was some provocation in terms of what happened with Ron Artest. No justification, mind you, but definitely he was provoked. However, in Steven Jackson's incident, I tend to disagree with Stephen A. from this standpoint. In a sense, he was provoked because as a player growing up playing, you're taught that the team is a family. And anytime you see a family member, whether right or wrong, involved in something, you're going to get involved as well. And again, this is all coming off of the end of a heated altercation between Ben Wallace and Ron Artest and everybody else getting involved, and he was animated. And at the time, remember, Ron Artest had gotten grabbed from behind, if you look at the video, and then somebody threw something in his face, and then that's what I think provoked Steven Jackson.
You mentioned Steven Jackson shouldn't have been suspended for as many as Artest. Stephen, you think he should have. What's the difference in being a teammate going into the stands to try and keep peace and a teammate going into the stands to try and defend your teammate?
Well, the first thing you could do is try to grab your teammate or try to separate the crowd. You don't just go in there and start throwing haymakers. That's just my personal opinion. I mean, all of us have been in our share of fights or what have you. Some of us growing up have been in melees, and the situation is simple. When somebody is directing blows in your direction, that's when you start throwing haymakers. If nobody threw a haymaker at you, then why would you assume that you need to go in there and start doing something like that? That's just my opinion.
Stephen, where I would differ with you is, and again, and all this talk that we're having, it's not justifying anything. I have no problems with the fines as they were handed out. But if you look at it from the standpoint of that being a family member, and again, there's no doubt that that's how a team is. If you see somebody in your family have something done to them, you're going to react.
For Ron Artest, if he could think enough not to fight Ben Wallace, he turned his cheek and walked away from a fight with Ben Wallace, why couldn't he think enough not to go in the stands?
Well, again, we're all looking at this and judging this Monday morning quarterbacking, and we're all rational beings to begin with. And I think one thing Ron Artest has proved is maybe he has an irrational aspect to his personality.
Is this going to put a black mark on the game enough so that fans will stop coming, or at least curtail it some?
Without question, for the immediate future. Over the long haul, no. But for the immediate future, absolutely.
I think it's going to be a black scar, and you know what? I don't think we can really place a time frame on it, because this could be something that carries on for a significant period of time, could be years, because again, remember, we live in a different age nowadays where you have so much more exposure to what's happening in the world, and more will be made out of this, and this will stay in the public eye. It's going to put a damper not only on this season, but every time you have an incident, this will be brought up. So it's definitely going to be there for the long term.
Real quickly, one word to describe how you felt watching that Friday night. Stephen?
Appalled.
Greg?
I was shocked.
Guys, we appreciate the time and the knowledge as always, man.
All righty.
All right, so Greg and Stephen A. have had their say, so we ask you, our ESPN SportsCenter question of the night. Do you agree with the NBA's decision to suspend Ron Artest for the rest of the season? We made it as easy as possible. Either yes or no. More Pistons-Pacers coming up inside SportsCenter, including a look at Ron Artest's checkered past and what makes Indiana's angry man tick, tick, tick. The Pistons right back at it on Sunday. Those pesky Bobcats taking the defending champs to double overtime and a game-winning dunk. All of Sunday's NFL action on the way as well. Peyton unloading in Chicago. Eli getting his first shot at his first NFL win. And talk about a first, the chase for the Nextel Cup rolls right down to the final lap. Coming up, the closest finale in NASCAR history.
أجمل اللحظات الرياضية خلال ديسمبر على أوربت. الكرة السعودية تزداد سخونة مع تغطيتنا الخاصة للدوري السعودي وكأس الأمير فيصل. براعات نجوم دوري السلة الأمريكي لا حدود لها. الدوري الهولندي يدعوكم للانغماس الكلي في عالم كرة القدم الشاملة. مواجهات دوري كرة القدم الأمريكية تزداد صلابة. أجواء الدوري الفرنسي حاشدة وتهز المشاعر. أوربت خلال ديسمبر عالم من الرياضة.
The level of talent has risen. The anticipation is at an all-time high. Dressed for success once again. The NBA, live Saturday with the following game on Orbit ESPN.
Miller. There's good enough, and there's better than it has to be. Miller. Good call.
I couldn't factor out his previous history. And if it had been perhaps another person who had a different track record here, might it have been different? I can't say for sure, but I think it's a fair point to make that it might have been.
Casual sports fans were likely first made aware of Ron Artest after the Pacer asked his coach for some time off so he could, among other things, promote his R&B album. Now, in the wake of Friday night's Punch Fest, he's a household name in households that have never heard of Shaquille O'Neal. Artest is the first player to be suspended for nearly an entire season for an incident that took place during an NBA game. As Bob Lee reports, the bad boy has just graduated to the worst boy ever.
Now Artest has jumped over the scorer's table and is trying to get down to the bench. Artest is in the stands.
Ron Artest and controversy, long fellow travelers, are now linked as never before. He won last season's honor as NBA Defensive Player of the Year. But the very intensity that elevates Artest's game and made him an all-star also puts him in the principal's office.
Butler hammered out of bounds by Artest.
2 years ago, his season was a 7-month voyage of belligerent behavior. Artest committing 8 flagrant fouls, suspended for a total of 12 games, and assessed $155,000 in fines. Following a loss to the Knicks, Artest destroyed a television monitor. And against the Miami Heat, while the game was in progress, he attempted to engage Pat Riley in conversation and actually confronted the coach at one point.
I never have ever talked to an opposing player. And I don't want anybody talking to me. You know, that's who he is. You know, he's a hell of a player, but he's got to get that under control.
Artest's behavior may have made him a particular fan target. Late in the regular season in Cleveland, Artest appeared to be hit by an object thrown from the stands. Following the Pacers' upset loss to the Celtics in the 2002 playoffs, Artest was struck by debris thrown by Boston fans and had to be restrained by a Pacers assistant coach.
Not gonna do this, man. Come on, man. Security. Get your security man.
Back here.
Last season, Artest missed only 1 game because of suspension. But this year, he was benched early on by Coach Rick Carlisle, having reportedly asked for time off. Artest says he wanted to heal from injuries. Other reports said his request involved an R&B music project.
As a man, you know, you got to be able to do what you want to do. So if I decide to want to, you know, leave the game or take a month off, you know, I'm a grown man. It doesn't make me crazy, you know, to want to do something that I want to do.
The Tempest focused attention on all of his prior problems, all of which pale in the face of his central role in Friday's melee, his landmark suspension, and now his permanent place in NBA infamy.
Mark Jackson joins us now. I was reading a bio on Ron Artest, and it said his emotion sometimes bubbles to the surface, but he's making strides in containing that intensity. You know him from St. John's, New York. What happened?
He didn't contain those emotions. The same thing that has made Ron Artest the best defensive player in the league and a great, great basketball player is the same thing that all of a sudden has stripped him for the rest of the season. He had a problem with containing it. In Chicago, he had a problem with containing it. In Indiana, somebody had to put a stop to it. They waited until the bubble burst, and now they have it sitting in their lap.
Well, the league suspends him for the rest of the season. What else does the league do to help this guy?
You have to get this young man help. He's a very solid young man from New York City, crying out for help. When you ask for a month or 2 off, 5 games into the season, to produce or promote a rap album, you have issues. And it's time to sit down and teach you a lesson. Not to put you at the end of the bench and suspend you for 2 games with pay, but to tell you, go ahead home, you're going to be suspended, we're going to take care of this, but you have a problem, young man.
He's got 4 kids. What do you think he says to his children when they ask about this?
I've witnessed Ron Artest with his kids, embracing them like a loving dad. He's a great human being that would do. Man up to it. Look at your kids in the eyes and say, Daddy made a mistake. I was wrong. This is how I handled it. This is how I should have handled it. I'm going to learn from it, and I'm going to be a better dad, and I'm going to be a better human being because of it.
How do you think he comes out of this at the end of the season, at the end of the suspension? How do you think he comes out of this?
I think he's going to come out of it fine. The reason being is because Ron Artest, that same heart, determination, and desire that has made him a super basketball player, is in the end is going to show. He's going to learn from his mistakes and experience his time off is going to help him, and in the long run, he's going to be just fine. I believe he's going to put quality people around him, and it's going to be to his advantage to have had this break.
Artest is a different kind of cat. If you ask him who's the toughest guy he ever had to defend, he'll tell you a guy named Mike Chatfield, who is a neighborhood playground legend where he grew up in Queensbridge, New York.
I got one problem with that. Here's a guy that faced me. I'm better than that, Mike.
Oh, he D'd you up when you all schooled around in St. John.
I will dust that Mike off.
That Mike. The Mike. Just point of reference there.
Been there.
We appreciate it, Mark.
Thank you.
Of course, it takes two to tangle, and if ever the Pistons could have used the longest road trip in franchise history, this was the time. No such luck. 2 nights after arguably the worst brawl in U.S. sports history, Detroit was right back at the scene of the crimes, plural, not singular. The Palace in Auburn Hills took on a different look Sunday night with Charlotte in town and Indiana long gone. As George Smith reports, security was tightened and awareness heightened.
Tayshaun Prince's emphatic jam put an exclamation point on 3 of the most tumultuous days in NBA history. After a few minutes of celebrating a dramatic double overtime victory with only 8 players on the bench, the reality of the league's severe suspension set in.
It's sad, you know, like I said, I know Ron. I played with Ron since college, you know, and you still love him to death, you know, but like I said, it's kind of a tough thing to comment on.
A lot of people think that's harsh, and a lot of people think, hey, maybe it might not be for some, you know. But, you know, that's what us players put them in that position to make that decision.
How do you feel about Ben getting 6 games, and how hard will it be to play without him?
It's always hard to play without our main guy, you know. He means to us what any other superstar means to their team, probably more so because he stands for what we, you know, stand for.
When you're aware that a lot of guys got severely punished and it's not over, and the feelings they have for our sport right now, and a lot of professional sports, we got to make it right. We got to show some responsibility.
The Pistons and Pacers were considered the top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference. That is until Friday night's fight knocked out 3 of Indiana's stars.
That's their first, second, and third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth option on their team. So it's going to be tough. I mean, I think they got to really adjust a whole lot because, like I said, it runs so much stuff through Ron, it runs so much stuff through Jermaine, it's going to be tough on them.
I feel terrible for Indiana. I felt terrible watching them play last night. But I feel bad for the whole league.
Pistons coach Larry Brown said this is one of the few times in his career he has not been excited about doing his job. He said it hasn't been a lot of fun going to work. So imagine how Rick Carlisle and the Pacers must be feeling right now. In Auburn Hills, Michigan, George Smith, ESPN.
Thanks a lot, George. Here are the highlights of that game George was talking about. Pistons hosting the Bobcats. Fans still came out, even fans of all ages. Kids, families, everything. And of course, security, as George said, heightened and tightened. We pick it up in double overtime. Darko Milicic enters. No players left in Detroit's bench through suspensions and fouls. Are down to just 5 players. Double OT.
Goes inside. Oh, 16.5 to go. That was ridiculous.
Tayshaun Prince buffs it right in Emeka Okafor's boards. Pistons up 1 with 16 seconds left. Bobcats last chance. Okafor, that would have been the first expansion team ever to beat a defending champ since the Buffalo Braves beat the Knicks in 1971. Instead, Pistons win 117-116.
Hey, are you finally ready for some football? Sunday's NFL action on the way, including a battle of quarterbacks now and not yet. Eli versus Michael Vick. Not really the guy you want to face in your first NFL start. Definitely not Peyton's first start and far from his first touchdown pass. Eli's older brother doing what he does best, and one day maybe better than anyone in history. Plus, one for the record books. In the final race in NASCAR's chase for the championship, the leaders separated by only a handful of points. Came down to one last lap.
هل تريدون معرفة كل شيء عن واحد من أفضل اللاعبين المصريين؟ هل تحبون كرة القدم المثيرة؟ هل تحبون معرفة المزيد عن ناديه الجديد وحياته في هولندا؟ فلا تفوتوا إذن مشاهدة مغامرة غالي كل جمعة بعد جمعة فقط على الرياضيات.
It's non-stop laughs this December on Super Comedy.
Am I being fired?
That's my Bush.
Hey, Cary Grant, come to bed with Sophia Loren.
Ciao, Bella.
We both know I'll be back tomorrow. I know you do.
Just shoot me.
That lucky toothbrush? She needs a friend. Okay.
The Single Guy.
Don't hate me because I'm beautiful.
Saved by the Bell.
There's so many people that can't look like that.
Yo, Dogo.
Premium Blend.
He's actually a genius.
The Ali G Show.
Do you have any bedrooms?
Trigger Happy TV.
Beat that.
The Norm Show. And many more. December on Super Comedy. Laugh at first sight.
Bravo.
I have been hired to help suppress the rebellion of yet another tribal leader.
What do you want from me?
To know my enemy.
You believe a man can change his destiny.
Every man does what he can until his destiny is revealed.
When I took this, you were my enemy.
The Last Samurai يعرض حاليا حصريا على TV Max.
Suspension coming up. Will the Pacers even make the playoffs? Mark Jackson, George Karl weigh in on what the Pacers can expect on the court. That in a bit, but first, more NFL action.
Yo, Eli Manning, welcome to the world of starting in the NFL. Giants and Falcons. First quarter, first set of downs for Eli, pressured and back in the NFC with 8.5 sacks. Still first quarter, no score. Michael Vick tells his teammates, I know. You know, 24-yard game, 104 yards rushing, fifth career 100-yard rushing game for Vick, and then hooking up with his boy Algie Crumpler. Can a brother get some algae with that, Vick? Michael, 9 touchdown passes this year. Late second quarter, Eli finds a wrong dude. Jason Webster, first of 2 picks that Eli threw. He rushed his passes early on. He said so.
I think just when I got into the game, I was so concerned of getting the ball out of my hands quickly and not taking sacks and making quick decisions that I got just a little too rushed at sometimes.
Third quarter, he even admitted he played better. 14-0 Falcons, third down. Eli scrambling, tosses it to Tiki Barber. Tiki Bear, 10 yards and a first down. Eli, 17 of 37, $162. And then give people what they want to Jeremy Shockey, 6-yard touchdown. And interesting, Archie Manning's first touchdown, Steve, and Peyton Manning's first touchdown, also 6 yards. Shockey does the okey-doke with the ball and then gives it to Eli. Fourth quarter, Eli working the 2-minute drill. Hands off to Tiki Barber, who's just been straight righteous this year. First down there, Tiki, 21 carries, 107 yards, 700-yard game of the season. Eli then completes to Ike Hilliard. But then Eli, 4th and 3, incomplete to Jeremy Shockey. After the game, though, Vic, very classy move, whispered in Eli's ear, you're going to be just like your brother in due time. Falcons get the win. Eli gets his first career touchdown pass. But like his brother and his father, he also threw at least 1 interception in his first career start. Peyton threw 3, went over 300 yards.